Hello, everyone. Sorry, it's a little tight back here. Thank you all so much for coming out tonight. My name is Amali, and I'm the events director here at Books Are Magic. We are so excited to have Jessica Valenti, Renee Bracie Sherman, and Busy Phillips with us tonight to celebrate the launch of Jessica's newest book, Abortion, and Renee's newest book, Liberating Abortion, and to lead a vital conversation about the precarious state of abortion rights today and the many steps that we can all take to ensure those rights survival, the survival of our bodies, and more in the months, years, and decades to come. Before we get officially started, I just have a few logistics to point out for how tonight's event is going to go. First up, we will be doing a hand-raised audience Q&A towards the end of the discussion, so please start thinking of questions to ask and hold on to them. After the talk tonight, Jessica and Renee will be around to sign and personalize your books by the table where you checked in. We'll let you know where and when to start lining up for that. And finally, if you're joining us virtually on the YouTube live stream, we would love to encourage you to buy copies of both of the authors' books online using the link in the live stream description. Okay, now I'm just going to read a few bios for all of our wonderful guests, and we're going to dive right in. Award-winning writer and activist Jessica Valenti is the author of 7 books, including the New York Times bestseller Sex Object, a memoir. Her groundbreaking anthology, Yes Means Yes, paved the way for legislation of the same name, setting what's now considered the gold standard for sexual consent. Her writing has been published everywhere from the New York Times and the Atlantic to Bitch magazine and The Toast. After the demise of Roe, Jessica founded Abortion Every Day, an urgent synthesis of anything and everything happening with abortion rights in the United States. She lives here in Brooklyn with her husband and daughter. Renee Bracie Sherman is a reproductive justice activist, abortion storyteller, and writer. She's the founder and co-executive director of We Testify, an organization dedicated to the leadership and representation of people who have abortions and share their stories at the intersection of race, class, and gender identity. She lives in Washington, D.C., and as I mentioned earlier, Busy Phillips will be moderating tonight's conversation. Busy is a New York Times bestselling author, activist, writer, and host of the new series Busy This Week. In January of this year, Busy was announced as the newest artist ambassador for the ACLU to advocate for reproductive freedom. This follows years of on-the-ground advocacy and testifying and doing loads of work with the ACLU to protect reproductive freedom and in states like Ohio and across the country, and calling on other artists and entertainers to join her in actions to protect bodily autonomy. She currently lives here in New York City with her two daughters and her golden doodle. Okay, that's all from me. Please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Jessica, Renee, and Busy. Woo!
I just want to say I'm so glad to be here. This is the first time I'm reading the book in public, and to have Renee be here especially, who's been such an inspiration in my work, is really meaningful to me. And I also wanted to say happy anniversary to my husband. It's our 15-year anniversary.
Congratulations!
He's very kind to be cool with me doing book events instead of going out to a nice dinner. I'm just going to start right at the beginning. This is chapter 1, and it's called Abortion is Good, Actually. It is. Abortion is an essential freedom, necessary for the self-determination of women and anyone else with the ability to get pregnant. It is not tragic, something to be apologized for, or a necessary evil. It is proactively, objectively good. There is no benefit in being tentative. For too long, pro-choice Americans, politicians especially, have offered apologetic defenses of abortion. Tepid messaging certainly didn't protect Roe, and it ceded the most important advantage we have, the moral high ground. After all, we're not the ones who are forcing children to give birth. We're not the ones making devastated women carry dead and dying fetuses. We're not the ones mandating that rape victims sign affidavits or that they prove that their attack really happened before being allowed to receive basic care. Forcing someone to be pregnant when they don't want to be is dangerous and cruel, and voters know it. Over 80% of Americans don't want the government making decisions about pregnancy at all. That means the extreme abortion bans going into effect across the country are being passed against voters' wishes. Why then are the people we elected to stop this horror show still putting out polite press releases? Why would we continue to be calm and reasoned? America supports abortion. It's time we acted like it. Part of the reason we're in this colossal mess is that politicians were afraid. They spoke in whispers and favored choice over abortion, instead of hammering home that we are right and that anti-abortion legislators are horrifically, dangerously wrong. They let conservatives call themselves the party of life. They didn't listen to years of advice of reproductive justice activists about the power of unapologetic support for abortion. Instead, they said abortion should be safe, legal, and rare, powering Republicans' claim that there's something wrong with ending a pregnancy. There's not. We have the chance, right here and now, to change the conversation. We can get out of the defensive crouch and force legislators to do the same. And as awful as our post-Roe world is, it also gives all of us the opportunity to build something bigger and better, both legally and culturally. There's never been a better and more important moment to ensure that our humanity is truly counted. No more hesitation, no more compromise. There's no such thing as a middle ground for our freedom. Because while abortion is a necessary and normal part of reproductive health care, and we should fight for it as such, it's our liberation that conservatives most object to. That's why they're passing bans. After all, if this wasn't about power, control, and punishment, why would some women be allowed abortions when they're raped? It's those of us who have sex willingly they want to teach a lesson to the most. The truth is that most anti-abortion sentiment and law is rooted in the idea that pregnancy is a punishment, a consequence for those who behave irresponsibly or promiscuously. The more ideologically pure lawmakers, those who believe in total abortion bans without exceptions for rape, incest, health, or even life, aren't any less punitive. Their push for fetal personhood, which defines fertilized eggs and zygotes as full constitutional human beings, eradicates women's humanity entirely, rendering us mere vessels for a handful of cells deemed to be the real human beings. What worse punishment is there than not being seen as people at all? That's what makes abortion good. It recognizes the humanity of women, something I truly cannot believe is somehow still up for debate. Women have spent decades trying to convince the government that we deserve to control our own bodies. We've explained calmly and politely that the ability to choose if and when to have children can be the most determinative factor in a woman's life. We've provided research showing that those who are denied abortions are more likely to stay with violent partners and live below the poverty line. We've shared our most personal experiences, recounting stories of sexual abuse and domestic violence, financial hardship, and medical trauma. We've shown that abortion is safe, much safer than pregnancy, and we've rebutted misinformation. We've knocked on doors and raised money, debated at school, work, and on the floors of Congress. We've started organizations and research groups. We've raised awareness everywhere from pop culture to your local hair salon. We voted, election after election, year after year. What has it gotten us? Not only was Roe eliminated, forcing our daughters and granddaughters to grow up with fewer rights than we had, but somehow we're still debating. Why are we still trying to convince people that 1 in 4 American women aren't murderers? Do we really think that one more story of a child raped by her father will move the hearts of men who would legislate away our humanity without even bothering to learn remedial facts about pregnancy? Asking for our rights didn't work then, and it won't work now. I refuse to explain over and over again that women are people. I'm done degrading myself by sharing the most intimate details of my life with strangers in the hope that perhaps one will muster a spark of empathy. Why should we beg for scraps of humanity from those who will never give it to us? Instead of offering diplomatic explanations for why abortion is necessary to protect women's health and lives, it's past time to speak plainly. Abortion is normal and moral. Not just because abortions are common, even though they are, or because women are happy to have access to them, even though that's true. Abortions are a proactive moral good because they allow people to control their own bodies, lives, and futures. What's more, abortion creates lives. Ask your friends and family how their abortions changed them. Ask them what they were able to do, what path they were able to take, because they had the freedom to end a pregnancy when they needed to. Abortion is often framed as the end of something. Even pro-choicers say someone terminated or ended a pregnancy. But it's often very much the opposite. For many, abortion has been the start of something. When I had an abortion at 28 years old, I was in the middle of writing my first book and just a few months away from meeting the man I would marry. The life and family I have now simply would not exist without that abortion. I would not have started a relationship with my husband Andrew, and I would not have given birth to my incredibly loved daughter Layla a few years later. A world without them both would be a much dimmer life, and it's one I prefer not to imagine. The abortion I had did more than allow me to create my family, though. It's had ripple effects. All abortions do. Because of my abortion, I wrote books and gave speeches. I did work that helped other women. And it wasn't just about feminism. When I was pregnant with Layla, I became critically ill with something called HELP syndrome. Both my daughter and I almost died, and Layla was born 3 months early, just at 2 pounds. Soon afterward, I wrote about the hardships of being a mom to a preemie, something I know made a difference in the lives of parents who were going through the same thing. 13 years later, and I still get emails about the pieces I wrote during that time. Without my abortion, none of that would have happened. Without abortion, I wouldn't have the friends I have now, or the career, or even my own very life. Because when I got pregnant again, 3 years after Layla was born, the chances of my getting sick and dying this time were significant. And so I had a second abortion, one that broke my heart because I desperately wanted another child, but ensured my daughter grew up with a mother. Those who rail against our rights like to divide women into 2 groups, those who have abortions and those who have children. Most often, though, we're both. Those who would see abortion banned like to pose hypotheticals about the remarkable baby a woman could have if she just didn't get an abortion. What if they cured cancer? Rarely, if ever, does anyone ask that the woman herself might change the world. They don't consider that we could be the remarkable ones, if only given the chance. I think I'll end there so I can switch.
Hi, friends.
Hello.
Okay. Because Jessica wrote from her opening chapter, I'm going to read from my closing chapter, which is titled Liberating Abortion, which is the title of the book. For nearly 40 years, Elnora Bracey didn't talk about her abortion. Only her sister and boyfriend knew she had had one, and since then, she hadn't really thought about it much. She'd met a Philadelphian in the Virgin Islands, and they began dating. He was a dreamer who lived in but contributed little to the rent of her Chicago apartment, she told us. Elnora had dreams too. She wanted to be a nurse. When she realized she was roughly 6 weeks pregnant, she knew quite quickly that she wanted an abortion. She wasn't ready to be a parent, but she had also heard her mother's warning echoing in her head. I'm done raising children. Don't be bringing any babies home here. She scheduled an abortion at a Planned Parenthood in downtown Chicago. Although she was glad to have access to abortion care, Elnora, who is Black, felt uncomfortable when the provider shamed her for using the rhythm method and told her that not using contraceptives and potentially needing additional abortions would be bad for her health. There was this guilt feeling I felt when they said that, she said. Once the abortion was over, she broke up with the boyfriend and started moving on with her life. Although she loved her mother deeply, Elnora wanted a life different from hers. She saw how her mother's lack of autonomy over her reproduction kept her tied to Elnora's father, who cheated on her constantly and dictated how every dollar in the house was spent. A few years later, while in nursing school, she met another student with whom she fell in love and had children when she was ready on her own terms. In July 2022, nearly 50 years after her abortion, Elnora felt that her decision came full circle. Less than a month after the Supreme Court overturned the right to an abortion, she was sitting with her husband watching a congressional hearing on the impact of abortions. As the first speaker shared her abortion story, she began to cry. I owe my life to abortion, not only my own, but because shortly after Roe v. Wade, a Black woman was able to have an abortion in Illinois, Renee testified. She was in a relationship that wasn't right for her, and her abortion allowed her to move on, attend nursing school, and marry a fellow student, and have a child with him. That child was me. As my mother told me, Renee, I chose you. That's exactly what abortion is about. The ability for all of us to choose if, when, and how to create our families on our own terms. As Elnora watched her daughter make history as the first person to share the self-managed abortion protocol before Congress, she broke down. "I felt like you were my voice. You were able to speak it for me and say all the things I wish I had the ability to say," Elnora told Renee in an interview. "When you spoke, it was like it was coming out of my mouth because you are me. You are a part of me." Since writing this book, Renee has learned of more loved ones who've had abortions, several of whom appear in these pages. Her mother's sister Vera had an abortion in the late 1970s because she already had 2 children and was working night shifts as a nurse. Renee's cousin Catherine, Vera's daughter, estimates that she had 10 abortions between having her 2 sons. They spoke candidly about the support Renee's mother provided Catherine when she first became pregnant with her son as a teen and was afraid to tell her parents when she needed subsequent abortions and help parenting. Renee and Catherine found similarities in their stories, including the fear of disappointing their mothers and their consideration of unsafe methods, such as throwing themselves down the stairs or using unsafe substances to cause abortions. These were the things they never uttered to other family members until then. Talking about abortion opened up something among all of them. For Renee, she felt a deeper connection to her kin, and an invisible weight of fear and shame was lifted off of her shoulders. She and her mother were liberated by sharing their abortion stories. When we share our stories, we open ourselves up to connect with others in a vulnerable way that transforms us. We trust each other with our deepest desires about our bodies and our futures. But we cannot liberate abortion with just feel-good vibes and caring for one another on an individual level. We actually have to change our society to work for all of us. For that, we believe reproductive justice and abolition are the keys to liberating abortion. Liberation calls for an investment in people and families. Our policies have been built on lies about all of us and our worthiness. Learning our history allows us to confront these untruths and demand retribution for the harm caused. We must open our eyes and realize that all of the problems in our society are created by disinvestment in families and our refusal to care for one another. To liberate abortion, we must change the way we see parenting in this country and around the world. Being a parent cannot be a role people take on through happenstance or because they couldn't afford to make any other decision. It should be a role people step into feeling confident and supported. It must be a role that people are supported in taking on by creating the conditions in which everyone can build a family on their own terms. That includes free access to reproductive technologies for low-income, queer, trans, disabled, single, and older people alongside everyone else. That means investing in keeping families together, regardless of immigration status, age, or how much money they have. It's an investment in communities to build our families collectively with all the monetary and physical resources we need. Family building must not be based on bank accounts. We have all that we need right now. It's just being invested in the wrong things. We must begin diverting tax dollars away from systems such as the family policing system, police departments, and the military, and into universal health care, child care, housing, and basic income. In order to liberate abortion, police must cease to exist. There is no way anyone can freely decide if, when, and how to grow their families so long as state-sanctioned violence and state coercion exists. Reproductive freedom cannot exist so long as police are funded to investigate people suspected of self-managing their abortions, having miscarriages, trading sex for money or resources, or neglecting their children simply because they can't afford childcare or to put food on the table. Everyone must feel safe and supported enough to obtain an abortion without being forced to involve police or anyone who would force them to engage with the carceral system. This vision also calls for the abolition of prisons. There is no freedom so long as our loved ones can be kept in cages for seeking health care or are forced to parent behind bars. We must end the practice of separating families and isolating people. People will no longer be separated from their loved ones. Rather, restorative justice practitioners would step in when conflict interventions are needed, and treatment programs would be available for pregnant and parenting people who live with addictions and illnesses. Abortion liberation forces us to see those who are impacted by unjust and unequal systems. The majority of us are people of color. The majority of us are already parenting. The majority of us are religious or spiritual, and the majority of us are struggling financially. We are trans and non-binary people, disabled folks, immigrants, and young people. We are groups of people who are forgotten about when under attack because people look at us and say, oh, well, that's not me. I'll never need this. It's not my life. It's not my loved ones. Abortion impacts all of us. How society treats people who have abortions is a reflection on our values. But that's why our abortion stories are so important. Because our voices change the conversation and challenge the myths and disinformation that are spread about who we are, what our lives are like, and why we had abortions. Our abortion stories reveal the ways the current political systems don't support our ability to decide if, when, and how to grow our families. Our stories reveal how our health insurance system denies people humanity when they're pregnant and need support, and our low minimum wage make it impossible for people to afford birth control, abortions, and children, often forcing the decisions for us. Our abortion stories are a reflection of what's wrong in society, not what's wrong with us. There's nothing more powerful than seeing someone feel confident, not just in making their own decision about whether or not to carry their pregnancy to term with support and love, but also in being able to talk about it without being burdened by shame and stigma. It's beautiful to see someone feeling confident in their bodies and expressing their sexuality and gender in their most authentic and joyful way. Our vision for abortion liberation is to build a world where everyone is free to make their own decisions without feeling terrible about themselves and their options. We hope that they can make those decisions surrounded by loved ones with real information. We hope it can be part of a journey to learn more about their bodies and themselves. We have never had a world where everyone is able to make free and liberated decisions about their pregnancies, bodies, or sexuality. There are no communities where everyone feels that freedom. The world we want to create doesn't exist yet. We have to imagine it. It's possible that we'll never get to experience the world we're building toward. But even if we can make a difference for a few people here and now, that will affect the next generation to come. Thank you.
Woo!
I think I'll do microphone.
Yes, this is. I know we're doing a little shuffle.
Well, it's not chill to have a podium in front of you when you're trying to talk about abortion. Hey, everybody.
Hey, Busy.
Guys, this is very exciting for me.
It's exciting for us.
One thing that we're never going to stop talking about is abortion. We're just never going to stop talking about it. And, well, it does take a toll. You know?
Yeah, a little bit. I like to say when I started the newsletter, I did not have gray hair. This is a new phenomenon.
Is this true? Is that kind of just like a bit? Like my ex-husband used to say that he didn't have any gray in his beard before I gave birth to our first daughter.
It's like 75% true.
Yeah, same with him. Renee, one thing that like always I feel with you is that you are able to center so much joy in this work and in talking about abortion. Can you speak to that a little bit? Because I do feel like Jessica is in the trenches with abortion every day and the real tragic fallout of the Dobbs decision. But and I'm so grateful that we're talking about both of these books together because I think they are such a perfect pair, and I really encourage all of you here and at home, I guess, in the whatever, to buy both of them because I think it's essential to have both sides of what we're really dealing with. But can you speak a little bit to your journey starting in 2016? Guys, not for nothing, she has been called the Beyonce of abortion storytelling, which I do think we have to mention.
I mean, you know, I'm starting to get a couple grays. had to make a very conscious decision to take care of myself and my team and everyone, because we not only do we sit with people who want to share their abortion stories and be patient with them and listen, but like I also still volunteer with my local like abortion fund and practical support. So I like drive people who are flying and taking the train down from your blue states to DC because they can't get later abortions here. So like I'm sitting with people all the time, and I think it is a choice that, and I think like anyone who's working in abortion funds or in abortion clinics has to do this choice of talking about it joyfully, because one, we do love the work that we do, but also it can be really frustrating to be like doing this work every day and you're like, why the fuck won't they listen? But like I have to, in order to get up every day and do this work, I have to think about the world that I'm trying to build, even as everything sucks. And I made that decision quite clearly for myself the day that Trump was elected. I worked so hard, I mean we all did, through the campaign. I was leading a campaign to try to get them to ask about abortion. It was hashtag ask about abortion during the campaign. And I skipped my birthday. They finally asked about abortion at a Fox News debate between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. And then we lost. And I was just like, okay, this man could be president for 8 years or longer because, he doesn't believe in term limits. But like, that's what I was thinking at that time. And I was like, I can't let him take all of my life. I have to exist and experience and enjoy the things that I am trying to build in this world. If I believe so deeply in reproductive justice, and that's the ability to decide if, when, and how to grow your families and how we care for families. And what does that mean if I'm doing this work, but like I'm not spending time with my family? Like I'm trying to live in the world that I'm trying to build, which is, why my two littles are here. It's like they keep me joyful. You just have to. It's a choice.
Well, yeah. I mean, yes.
Otherwise it's exhausting.
It is. Yeah, but I mean, I guess to that point, and Jessica, it's because it's interesting because then you read from the end of your book where you really sort of do go through the ideas that you present of what reproductive justice is, which for a lot of people who work in the abortion space, or even just like a person, one of the 80% plus at this point, plus Americans who do think abortion
now Melania too. She's doing that.
Oh, she has always been staunchly.
Yeah, I know. I remember
favor.
seeing her at all the rallies.
If you don't know, not everyone may know what you're talking about. Melania Trump, like, totally
She's selling a book too.
Is selling a memoir, and very coincidentally, right when her husband is 20 points below in with women, has decided that she is a passionate, staunch supporter of abortion rights. Good times.
I don't even know if she exists. Do you know what I mean? Like at this point, I'm like, is it AI? Like I don't know. But the idea of reproductive justice, I think, for a lot of people, even people that work in the abortion activism space, this is a real groundbreaking idea of what it could look like. And even just listening to you read it, like I was getting like very like, oh, right, that's right. I remember. Yes, that's right. That's what it could be. Do you feel like you're making, because it feels right now like we're in this such a backslide, how do you feel in terms of saying not only are we going to Roe is the floor?
Yeah.
How do you feel like that is going? You know what I mean? Like how are you making that or like cutting through with that message?
Well, I have always held, and we know this, 80% of the country supports abortion rights. Just because our politics are gerrymandered does not mean that we can't create better communities and we can't do great work locally or within our families, right? And I remember when, when he was elected, a lot of reporters were like, well, how are you going to change your work? And I was like, I'm not. My work is actually not going to change at all, because the majority of people in this country voted for a presidential candidate who wanted to end the Hyde Amendment, which is getting rid of the federal ban on Medicaid coverage of abortion. And that matters today. Today is October 3rd. It is the day that Rosie Jimenez died. She's the first woman known to have died because she had Medicaid insurance and she went to go get an abortion and could not afford her abortion because she could not use her Medicaid insurance, right? Like, these stories live with us, and the majority of the country does not believe in that heinous policy. The majority of the country believes that we deserve abortion access. The majority of the country wants us to be able to build beautiful communities and with our families. And so I feel like if I just only look at what the 20% is like bitching about, I won't be able to get up every day. But also, somebody's got to be thinking about, okay, when we finally like ungerrymander everything, what's the game plan for next, you know?
I think that's a really good point. And Jessica, because the right has, and these extremist politicians have so mastered the language of subterfuge and like saying things that aren't real, how do we combat it? And as the 80%, when the 20% seems so loud, and also, by the way, fucking scary.
Yeah.
Because
They're
not
nuts.
one bitch up here hasn't had a death threat.
Yeah.
Okay? And like, scary.
Yeah.
That 20%.
Yeah.
So what do we do? How do we...
Yeah. I mean, I think starting from a place of hope is a good idea, because the messaging is so clearly on the defensive, right? Anti-choice politicians really, really know that the vast majority of Americans want abortion to be legal. And not just want abortion to be legal, but do not want government involvement in pregnancy decisions at all. And so that's a pretty strong place to start from. My sort of obsession and focus these days is holding mainstream media outlets accountable. I think that like this is one of the biggest problems that we have. You would never know that support for abortion is as strong as it is if you just relied on newspaper headlines and magazine headlines, right? I think there's a real danger of both sides journalism, where they're so eager to give equal space to both sides, even though one is just not true, one is not scientific, Americans don't believe in it. And I think part of what frustrates me also is that journalists are losing out on what I think is this huge political story of these laws are being passed against the wishes of the vast majority of voters. You're talking about this tiny group of extremist legislators imposing their will on the vast majority of voters, and it really doesn't get talked about that way. It really gets talked about the country is polarized, voters are split, and that's
Voters are not split.
Voters are not even slightly split. Even
And
in
what
red states.
But what is it? Is it literally that we've turned everything into Sports Center? You know what I mean? Like that they turned politics into Sports Center in the year 2000.
Right. I mean, and I'd be curious what you think about this as well. I think that journalists are very afraid of being called biased. Mm-hmm. I think that they and even great journalists have editors who have bosses, who have publishers that they're beholden to. And there's a lot of fear, especially with the anti-choice movement. They are very good at just harassing the shit out of reporters, right? Like, you use this word, that's not true. You didn't include it. And editors get bothered by that, and they respond to that. They're really good at mobilizing this huge community on the ground to just absolutely harass people, and reporters included.
Yeah, I think one of the things we talk about in Liberating Abortion is actually this like long history of the way in which abortion first came into the news, into the headlines. It was very, if it bleeds, it leads. And so anytime that someone was arrested for providing abortions, often because someone died because of an unsafe abortion in, 1920s or so, it was the headlines. And that's where people got this idea that like all abortions are dangerous because all I ever see about it is that it is dangerous. But the thing is that, you know, we didn't really know, that was the numerator. We didn't really know what the denominator was because they're not reporting on all the abortions that people got quietly and were fine and there was nothing, right? So there's sort of, it started out with journalism and this like feeding frenzy, and it has all of the things that makes like really salacious writing. Often a provider of color, or a provider who was not a doctor, so a midwife or a nurse, and so a quack. There was often, it was a low-income patient or a woman of color patient, and so there's like sex and death and blood and all these things, and so that sold papers. But then again, we get to when finally abortion is legalized and we're pushing back to say like, hey, it is healthcare. We actually need some sort of liberation or reform, whatever it is, right? There's this idea again of how do we report this? And like you said, it gets to this biased piece. I mean, I can't even begin to tell you how many reporters I've talked to who are like, yeah, they won't let me report on this because I've said that I've had an abortion. But, and it's so funny because you would never like tell, I mean, well, maybe they would tell journalists of color they can't write on race, but like they would never like tell a male journalist that he can't like write on, I don't know, vasectomies or erectile dysfunction pills and tests. God, I keep dropping my foot. They would never say that, right? But like the stigma that we have had for decades is so deeply ingrained, and that if you have an abortion, therefore you are automatically biased, and you are susceptible to misinformation, and you might not be putting out the truth because you might be trying to get people to have abortions. But in reality, they don't realize that they actually don't know shit about how bodies work. They don't know anything about how pregnancies work. I mean, we have at the point where we've got, it'll be like an anti-abortion activist and an abortion provider doctor. And those are the two experts. One of them went to medical school. One did not, and yet those are equal. But also this happens in journalism in a lot of areas, and it's really frustrating. I think it's really important that we then lift up where there's journalism where they are doing it right. I want to give a little shout out to Alana Vagianos is here. She's at HuffPost doing great work, right? But like I think that this is really critical in that we have to be thoughtful about the information that we consume, and when we understand how bodies work, how pregnancies work, we can also be like, wait a second, that line doesn't make any sense. What is this?
Well, yeah, we talked about this, but yeah, jump in.
I just wanted to add something about, I think this notion of who's objective and people in the abortion rights space not being objective is incredibly, incredibly important. And I think one of the first big stories we saw this with post-Roe was the 10-year-old rape victim who had to travel from Ohio to Indiana. And the Washington Post did this big like fact-checking piece basically saying it wasn't true, and the reason that it couldn't possibly be true is that the only person who could verify this was an activist, meaning the abortion provider who was in the room performing the abortion. And the fact-checker said, well, because the state police haven't confirmed it, it can't be true. In what universe is law enforcement prosecutors of a state that bans abortion more objective than a person who was in the room performing? Like, it was just mind-blowing, but that's what we have to go up against.
Okay, since you invoked the Washington Post, I just have to say, what's also really interesting is that there's an editor who runs their health newsletter. She's somehow not biased that her in-laws run the Americans United for Life. But what else?
I had to drop that in there, I love it.
The problem is that all of us in this room are like, get it. You know what I mean? But what the fuck do we do for everybody else? I'm so sorry, guys, but you know what? Welcome to my life. My children are...
They're in my life. They've heard that word.
All right. But how do we combat the narrative and the public discourse? How do we change the public discourse? And certainly through storytelling. I mean, I firsthand experienced like the impact of just talking very plainly about my abortion. That, by the way, it wasn't life-saving medical care. I was 15 and accidentally knocked up by my boyfriend, and I had an abortion, and it was fine. Full stop. That's it. But other than continuing to tell our stories over and over and over again, how do we do it? How do we combat this in the public discourse? Everybody here, everyone listening.
I mean, I think part of what my project is, I think there's a ton of different ways to do this, but what I'm interested in, people will often ask me if I'm, preaching to the choir, right? Because I'm talking to people like you all in this room or at the newsletter, and I like to say that I'm arming the choir, because I do think there are so many people who care about this issue, who want more information, who want the context, who want the language, who don't have the space and time and energy to do this all day, every day, and to make it their life. But they would really, really love to know what they can do and how they can talk about it. And I think that's why the work Renee is doing is so vital as well, right? It's presenting a model for how to do this.
Yeah, I think it's a mix of when we share our stories. It's not just about like, here I had an abortion and here's what it is, right? It's also like having a conversation with the people we love about what is the world that we want to build. And that's something that, we put forward in the book of not only that, like, most of the things that you know about abortion are like based on lies and stigma and misinformation.
You coined the term abortion-splaining.
Yes, you all have been abortion-splained. We have an entire chapter where we go through some of the most ridiculous, but also like quite serious and pervasive myths about abortion. Everything from, that abortion causes tornadoes, hurricanes, and earthquakes. I literally, abortion powers your lights in the electrical grid, I did not know that one. I hadn't heard that was the president of Americans United for Life. Shout out to them again. And their connection to the Washington Post. But she said this. I witnessed it. She testified before Congress and said this. And, we go into the book of like, it's so silly, right? But then we go into why do they want you to think that? Because they want you to think that abortion is everywhere, it's pervasive, it's disgusting, and that you're actually uncomfortable with it. And so you shouldn't talk about it. Because they're trying to silence us. But then we also get into some of the more pervasive myths that you've often heard. Abortion is the Holocaust. Abortion is slavery. Abortion is black genocide.
People always regret their abortions.
Yes.
The majority of people regret their abortions.
No, we don't.
Right. No, we don't.
And also, even if someone does, of the 5% that do, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're anti-abortion. And when you actually have a conversation with someone about it, it's actually that they wanted to be able to parent. They did not have the support and the resources to be able to do so. The same thing actually happens with adoption. You should read Relinquished by Dr. Gretchen Sisson. So good. But they wanted to parent, but they didn't have the resources and support. So they were coerced into placing a child for adoption. This is where we can then say, look, let's have a conversation about the world that we want to build, making sure that everyone has what they need. Why are we still separating families at the border? Why are we still kicking teens out of school? Ivy, can I give you a little shout out? So when Ivy was 5, I was doing research for the book, and I was reading Faye Waddleton, the first Black president of Planned Parenthood's book, and we were having a conversation about teens and teens getting kicked out of school. And so she was like, why do they do that? And I was like, well, they say because they got pregnant, they can't go to school, they have to leave. And she was like, well, it's school. Why don't they just have the mom and the baby go to school? And I was like, duh, children get it. But we are so obsessed with punishment in this country. And I think if we really have to, as Mariam Kaba says, abolish the police in your head and start thinking about how do we actually change the way our tax dollars are funding our communities. How do we show up for one another, interpersonally and as a community? And that is hard work. No matter what happens with any election, it actually starts with all of us in our communities.
I just want to add, they're creating the world that they want, right? Like they are very, very good at that. They are well on it when you look at all of the crisis pregnancy centers, the new surge of maternity homes, right? They are doing it. And that's why I'm so grateful to you and why it's so important that we're doing it too, but better.
Yeah, we gotta start funding more abortion clinics, guys.
Truly,
There's
there's
like some fancy fucking fundraisers.
truly check in with your local abortion clinic, because a lot of them, the Medicaid reimbursement rates are so terrible, and so a lot of them are on the brink of closing, even in blue states. I was just talking to an abortion provider last night at an event that I was at. It's an all trimester clinic, and they were concerned that they might have to close. So, you know, if you care about this, donate to your local abortion fund. Show up for your local clinic. Like, know what abortion access looks like in your own community. Just because you live in New York doesn't necessarily mean that people are able to get abortions and people travel here. Also, you guys have a ballot initiative.
I was just
We
gonna
do
say,
have the ballot initiative.
one.
From
Yeah, do you want to tell them about it in
one.
case anyone doesn't know?
It's New York's Equal Rights Amendment. We have an opportunity.
Woo!
Yeah, very exciting. We have an opportunity to vote for abortion rights. I really wish that more people knew about it, so thank you for mentioning it.
I'd like to open it up to questions. Anyone have a question? Okay, in the back, let's start with you. Yeah, that's you.
Yes, you, Dr. Shaw.
Hi. Hi.
Oh, hi.
Hi, Jessica. Hi, Renee. Nice
Hey.
to see y'all. Happy to get to know you, but nice to be in the room with you. I'm Dr.
Wait,
Shaw.
come up here. No, come up here and get on a mic. Then you also have to tell everybody what your book is named, because we also have another author in that. All the abortion books.
Same thing. I'm gonna say.
Hi, everybody. Hi. I'm Dr. Mira Shah. I'm a physician. I'm a proud abortion provider. I wrote You're the Only One I've Told of the Stories Behind Abortion several years ago, when Roe was still in place. I love you too. You all are awesome. I follow you, work with you. We're all part of the movement, fighting the fight. So, you know, you talked about arming the choir. The right has this like creepy obsession with later abortion, post-birth abortion. And, you know, I feel like the pro-abortion movement, it does give some people the ick. And they don't know how to respond to that. And I'm really sick of hearing, well, it's only like 1%, right? Like, that's not the point. The point is that they're needed, and we have to protect access to later abortion, not post-birth abortion, because that's murder.
It doesn't exist.
It doesn't exist. And so, what is y'all, like, how, you know, what is your approach? Renee, I know we've talked about this in my class, but I think the audience needs to hear, but also what your take is on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I think that one of the biggest problems is something that you said, which is this stigmatizing language of, it's so rare, it barely happens, it's this defensiveness from Democrats, this unwillingness to talk about it, when actually I feel like this could be one of our strongest messages. And you're sort of seeing this already with all of the post-Roe horror stories that are coming out and all of these people who've been denied care. The majority of the stories that we're hearing are from people who were later on in their pregnancies, right? And so there's this opportunity to talk to those people, to have them share their stories, to put them at the forefront and to really dig in and have politicians, journalists push back, not do this like running away thing, but actually proactively talk about it.
Yeah, because we had a conversation about this a couple weeks ago, and I really do think palliative care is an interest of newborns is a really interesting, yes.
So the post-birth abortion thing came about, what he's talking about is palliative care for fatally ill newborns, right? There are laws in certain states, and there should be everywhere, that say if you have a preemie that was born way too early to survive, if you have a newborn with a fatal illness, you don't have to give them painful medical interventions. You can say goodbye without tubes and wires, and you can go in a room and be with your baby and, you know, be with them while they pass. That's what they're calling post-birth abortion. And I think, again, if Democrats told those stories, right, like this is who he's calling executioners. These are the families that he's talking about. I think it's incredibly powerful, it's incredibly troubling, but there is like a real chance there to have a real conversation.
What's interesting about later abortion is like nobody can actually tell you when later abortion starts because they just start making it up. Because you know what? Now they're starting to say after 6 weeks is a later abortion.
Right.
They just make shit up.
Yeah.
Like it's truly, and I defend abortion anytime, any reason, anywhere in this country.
Woo!
I don't care what the reason is. I don't care. Because I have supported people who had abortions at 32 and 34 weeks because they actually just found out they were pregnant 4 days before that. That is what they needed. And so people deserve access to an abortion as soon as they realize they have an abortion. I have taken care of people who tried to get an abortion at 6 weeks, but because of the barriers and the cost of the abortion, pushed them well into the 20s. We do not make it easy for people to get the health care that they need. We do not make it easier for people to understand how their bodies work. And then we shame them for not having the money. We shame them for not having the information. We shame them for being people of color who have sex and get pregnant. Like, so much of our language is just based on this idea of just shaming people for how their bodies work. And so at the end of the day, it actually doesn't matter whether it is this like later 40 whatever or 7 weeks, because at some point they're just going to start making it up. The other thing, again, we go into this in Liberating Abortion, is if you actually look at the history of abortion, what was considered an abortion, thousands of years ago or even 200 years ago is actually what we call later abortion today. Because before that, it was just bringing your period back. So we've actually moved the goalpost because the Supreme Court created the trimester system with the Roe decision, because we have newfangled technologies like ultrasound machines and gender reveal parties and whatever else. Like, that's all new.
Well, and because of evangelicals.
Right, but it's all new. And so they're now putting this morality on something that people have always been doing. And so at the end of the day, I mean, I don't care why someone is having an abortion. That is absolutely not my decision. It's for them. And I trust them to make the best decision with whomever that is. And I think that you can't whine about later abortion and then block access to abortion earlier in pregnancy, fight against a national health system, fight against childcare for all. I'm sorry, I don't want to hear it.
I love you so much.
Okay, another question. Yes.
One more.
Yes. Well, you were, yes.
Okay. I read in Jessica's book that people who have a lack of regret for abortion is out of all the people who have abortions is 99%. Well, the people who have a lack of regret for transitioning is about 93 to 97%. And since trans rights and reproductive rights are the same issue, not related or similar, but the same issue, do you think that there's more to it to the right wing, that they don't just want that they want anybody who isn't a white cisgender man to be happy?
Yes. I mean, yeah.
Yeah,
right?
That's
Very
it's
clearly.
pretty close. I mean, as you said, these are issues that are inextricably linked, because this was never just about abortion. This was never just about one thing, right? It's about reinforcing these traditional gender roles, traditional gender binary, white supremacist patriarchy. That's the whole thing, and that's why you see in places like Nebraska, the anti-abortion ban, the abortion ban is the same exact law as a ban on gender-affirming care. They don't separate these things out.
I think the only thing I would add is that so the way that this idea of people regret their abortions came during the Gonzalez v. Carhart decision, where the Supreme Court wrote we would assume that women would come to regret their abortions, right? And just wrote that. There was no evidence. So then where the data point that we're citing comes from is the Turnaway study, which is also a fantastic book you should read. Yeah. Dr. Diana Green Foster at the University of California set out to be I don't know, let's see Justice Kennedy's I mean, not totally to like prove them wrong, because demographers are very like, let's see what the data say, but like, let's see. And turns out, guess what? We don't, because we actually know what's best for us. And people who have abortions have more certainty on their decision than people who have knee replacement surgery. But what is the point of sowing this idea that people would regret their abortion? It is to then say, like, oh, look, they waffle, oh, they're unsure. We then can insert a waiting period. We then can insert that this idea that what you're doing is wrong. It's morally unacceptable. We can insert any other ideas, because we are actually saying that you don't know what's best for you. We're seeing it with trans healthcare, where they're like, these kids, they don't actually know if they're trans. Yes, they do. And like, also, what is it to you? Truly, what is it to you?
Yeah. What is it to anyone what we do with our bodies? And I think that's the point. Thank you both so much. I hope everybody bought the book, people at home, and these ladies are going to sign them for you. And Jessica, Valenti, Renee Bracie Sherman, you guys are an inspiration. You continue to show up and do the work, and I love you both so much for it.
We love you.
Thank you for being here, everybody.
Yes, thank you all so much for coming out. Just a few final reminders before we wrap up. Again, if you're still with us on the live stream, you can buy a copy by clicking the link in the bio there. For those of you with us in person, as Busy just said, if you didn't grab a copy yet, we have plenty of additionals available at the register where you checked in. We also have a few copies of Jessica's previous book, Sex Object, which is very little, so it'll slip right into your bag, so I highly recommend checking that one out as well. These two will be around to sign your books. That's gonna happen up at the front. Tiff, would you mind pointing? Yes, right there in front of those shelves. So what we're gonna ask is that you all sit tight for a moment while we get them settled back there, and then please make sure to grab all of your personal belongings with you so that we can start to clear out all of these chairs and rearrange our space, and then we'll all have a great rest of the night. All right, we're gonna just say thank you once more to Jessica. Thank you to everyone.